On this episode of Carnage, we're going to sort out the fuel system on our V8 Lexcen build. On the previous episodes of Carnage, we have built ourselves a quad cam V8 engine. We've fitted up the K-frame, engine mounts, we've done the initial layout of the engine and gearbox in the car, we're making a new transmission mount, fitted up an intercooler. And now we're getting towards the pointy end of the build where we need to plumb it, wire it, make it run. And in all that, we need to do ourselves a fuel system. So we've got a bunch of Proflow gear here on the table. Let's show you how it all goes together and how we make it fit the car. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be using a lot of Proflow components here, and you can find them all in the latest Proflow catalogue, which you can get through VPW. The major component of this build is going to be the billet surge tank. Surge tank, surge pot, whatever you want to call it. It holds a couple litres of fluid, and the whole basis of it is that you pump fuel in the top, you have this reservoir of fuel that you can then, you have your high flow fuel pumps in there and pump high pressure fuel to the front of the car and supply as much horsepower as you need. Now the beauty of this pot is it will hold not one, not two, but 3 fuel pumps if you wish. We're not going to do 3 fuel pumps. We're going to do 2 fuel pumps. That will be enough. We're going to use these Proflow 600 horsepower pumps. They're only little guys and they will supply fuel for 600 horsepower. However, you know, we're only aiming for what? 500 rear wheel horsepower. Let's say that we get crazy and go 600 rear wheel horsepower, all right? So what's that, about 800 at the crank? Well, 2 of these pumps will do technically 1200 horsepower, so therefore we are well within the realms of possibility there. You never want to, you know, make your pumps sort, say if you've got 1200 horsepower fuel capacity, you're not going to use that on a 1200 horsepower engine. You would have, you know, 1500 horsepower of fuel capacity or even greater for a 1200 horsepower engine. We're going to have, what, maybe an 800 horsepower engine, so 1000 to 1200 horsepower worth of fuel capacity will be plenty. For this build, we're going to use -8 Teflon line. I like using Teflon line, especially if it's any of the fuel hoses are going to be in the cabin. And being a station wagon, that's kind of going to be par for the course because the station wagon gives us no other place to put any fuel system components. You know, something's going to have to be inside with us. And with that in mind, yeah, we want to have no fuel smell in the car. If you use rubber hoses, doesn't matter what quality they are, they will all permeate fuel vapor and smell. So Teflon won't, and so we've used Teflon in, say, the Volvo build, which had the fuel system in the boot. You never smelt fuel in that car at all. So it's definitely the way to go. If you're going to end up with fuel system in the boot or in the back of the car, anywhere it shares a cabin space with you, you definitely want to go Teflon lines just so you don't have to smell fuel when you're driving the car. So as I mentioned before, we're going to put 2 fuel pumps in our surge tank. We're also going to use a Proflow rising rate fuel pressure regulator, and we're going to use a Proflow flex fuel sensor adapter. The sensor is still on its way, but yeah, we're going to use a flex fuel sensor because we're going to run this car at, say, drag challenge and events like that. You want, obviously on the track we'll be running E85, but when we're out on the street, you know, we may run 98, whatever, and the flex fuel sensor gives you the capability of pulling power and timing out of the tune to suit, you know, 98 versus E85. So, you know, out on the road you may not be able to get E85, especially when you're out the backside of Victoria on drag challenge or something like that. You can just drive around on 98. It's not like you're going to be giving the car a hard time or anything. And then as you get close to the track, you tip E85 into it, flush that 98 out of the system, get a higher ethanol content into it, and therefore all your power and timing comes back into play. Right, so they will be up the front of the car. This will be up the back of the car. Let's open it up and have a look inside. before we get started, I should mention that when you open up your fuel pump box and you've got all your little goodies out of it, the hose that comes in there is not E85 compatible. So if you're going to run 91 or 98, that's fine. But if you're going to run an E85, you need to toss this in the bin and go get yourself some submersible E85 hose, which VPW does offer in their catalogue. It's just not standard with the kit. Now, we need that hose. It's in our next order of goodies from VPW, but because we don't have that, we can't actually mount the pumps in the surge pot right now. So what we can do though is just throw a couple of bolts in the top of our surge pot, find a location for it in the car, and start planning the running of our fuel lines and hoses, and also mount our regulator and that. And by the time we've done all that, our other bits will be here, and then we can mount our pumps in our surge tank. That is our plan. So anyway, let's go find a home for this, and we'll also find a location for our regulator and our flex fuel sensor. Now, finding a location for our surge tank isn't as easy as you may think. I was hoping that we could put it in the spare wheel well, but it's just a fraction too tall. I mean, once you've got a fitting up on there, it sits too high. It's just unfortunate that with the spare wheel well not being deep enough and the fitting on top of our surge pot, it will not sit under the floor level. So it's a bit of a shame. It can't go any deeper, like we can't recess the spare wheel well at all because the fuel tank is right under there. We can mount it over here somewhere. It's not the preferred spot, especially in the cab with us. However, as I said, with Teflon lines, we won't smell it or anything like that. We might be able to recess it into this side panel. I have to pull this away and see what's behind there. And there's also a bit of clearance under the floor pan of that side because the fuel tank sits sort of that low below the floor level. It doesn't sit fully, you know, tight to the floor. So let's have a look at what's behind this panel and see what we've got to work with. There's a speaker. Okay. Do I need a speaker there? Probably not. Oh, that's looking promising. So I think you can see where I'm going here. We might trim this straight down there, bend this flap over, and then we can recess our surge tank right into the outer bodywork here. Yeah, I think this is going to work and work pretty well. Awesome. Kind of something like that. Now that we've got a rough location for our surge pot, we're going to lift the car up, have a look at the fuel tank. We'll probably drop it, I think, at the moment. Drop it down so we've got some room to work with under there. Let's get it up. So as you can see, the fuel tank's quite large, although it has like a flat section here where it sits under the spare wheel well, and then it jumps up a bit on this end, but it still doesn't go all the way to the floor pan. Like I can reach up and put my hand above the tank right there. So yeah, I think we're going to be best served by pulling that out just for the moment so we can run our lines and everything, just to make things a bit easier. But yeah, we should probably find out how much fuel's in this. Hopefully not a lot. A little bit. Right. Oh, jeez. This is close to 40 litres in that bloody tank. Bugger. Right. So we've just put in a big order with VPW for a whole bunch more of Proflow gear. That should be here tomorrow. Obviously pulling the tank out took a fair while because 40 litres of fuel dribbling through 2 little holes. Yeah, that actually took a few hours to do. So unfortunately we're going to have to leave it there for today, but we'll get all our parts tomorrow, and we've got our bulkhead fittings coming. We'll mount this properly and we'll start running our lines and stuff, but we'll check back with you in tomorrow for more carnage. It's a brand new day and we have brand new parts from Proflow and VPW. So we've got a whole bunch of fittings and we have our submersible E85 hose. So there it is, E85 submersible hose from Proflow. So we can use that inside our surge pot. In fact, I did some fab work a little bit earlier and I come up with this little plate which we're going to mount to the floor in here, which goes in like that. So we've got obviously the 4 mounting holes for the surge pot, and then we've got 2 mounting holes here and here into nut certs, but I didn't think that was enough, so I've put a third one, a nut on the underside, and a bolt comes up under the floor pan, which gives us 3 points of contact and should hold it pretty steady. So yeah, I think that's going to be a good solution to our problem there. Now in our little lot of goodies there, we should have some bulkhead fittings. So we'll mount our surge pot there and then we'll go bulkhead fittings through the floor behind there and down underneath, and we'll have filters and lines and regulators up the front, all sorts of goodies. So let's make it happen. Well, we have a lot of fittings here, so let's start getting them out of the bags. So these ORB fittings are really good, ORB being an O-ring, so they're a straight thread there with an O-ring, and then you have your AN fitting on the other side. They're great, they don't leak, which is why they use them pretty much as an industry standard across all the fittings these days. Just be careful that, sometimes you'll have a straight, -8 ORB to a -8 fitting. In this case we've got -10 ORB to a -8, because -8 is what we're using for our fuel line. But obviously these filters use a -10, so just make sure you order the right stuff. But yeah, that looks good. Obviously we'll tighten it all later, but yeah, hold it that way. Flow that way. On the top of our surge pot, we've got 4 holes basically. So we've got the supply, so that comes from our big fuel tank into the surge pot, and then we've got our pumps hooked to this one, so we've got 2 to 3 pumps flowing out of that one to the front of the car, and then we have a return line running from the front of the car to there, and then when this overflows There's this overflow will go return to the big tank. So that's how we've got it set up in the Volvo. The Volvo has no problems at all with fuel supply. It works perfectly. So we will mirror that with this. So I'm just marking out the step drill with tape to know which size hole I want to go to. We'll make some adjustments to that, but that's basically the way we're going to go. So from there, straight into there, through the floor, into a line and filter to the front of the car. ×4. When doing Teflon lines like these, it pays to have this little tool to stop yourself getting stabbed in the finger by all these sharp little ends. So let's start. Pull it apart, grab our olive, slide that over the end. Right, and get our olive. Now we're just got to separate the braid slightly. Let's go stick it in a vise. Alright, we're lined up. There we have it, our first Teflon join. Alright, let's mark up the other end. Make sure it's right. So obviously if you're doing this at home, don't just lock your fittings up in the vise directly. Grab yourself a set of these Proflow aluminium vise jaw protectors. You lock your fittings up in there without fear of damaging them. And then obviously aluminium spanners like this Proflow one. Complete the set. Alright, let's slide this on. So let's test fit the first of our lines. Right, now just 3 more. So we've got a 10 micron filter here, which has been recommended to me by many racers in terms of you need very fine filtration for E85. We're just looking at places to mount it. We're going to mount it up here near our bulkhead connector and then run our line off to the front of the car. So actually it's got to go that way. Make sure I face the arrow the right way. So yeah, out of our surge pot, through the floor, into our filter. We're going to have to order a double female connector there, and then we need to mount that as well. So yeah, need to order some more parts, but we'll be able to get them pretty quickly. And yeah, we'll just keep going with making lines and making sure everything fits and make sure we get everything kind of where we need it to be. Chop. Perfect. It's so tiny. it's important when you're doing a setup like this to leave enough room to get a spanner in there so you can actually tighten things up, which I have done, but I haven't done in the past. So learn from my mistakes. Before anyone gets their panties in a bunch about the arc of this particular fitting, I'm just missing this fitting in the top of the surge tank at the moment, so it's a -8 at the moment. I need a -6, but once that's in, they will all have, well, at least these two will share the same arc and these two will have the same arc, and it'll look pretty neat and it'll work, most importantly. So that's the top side stuff done. Now we've got to do lines forward and return, and then to the tank and return from the tank, but they all run to our little bulkhead connectors, so everything's under the car now. So before we run a feed and a return line up the length of the car, we've got to work out where we're going to put our regulator and a flex fuel sensor, but to do that we also need the engine back in the car, so let's put the engine back in the car, and it will need the transmission back in the car so it all sits right. So then we can work out the positioning of our regulator and flex fuel sensor, and then we can run our lines. It's a nice big loop. Anyway, we've also cleaned up the notch on our cover and got it welded up, so it's looking really good now. You'll see that as it goes into the car. So you might also notice that we've put V-bands on the front of our manifolds. So we'll do pipes off there, turbo probably there, but yeah, I have to go buy some steam pipe bends so we can sort of stitch that together. I'll tack it together and then I'll take it down and get that welded up. But yeah, it's all coming together. And up we go again. All right, engine and trans back in again. So, engine's in, gearbox is in, cam cover clears beautifully now that we've recessed it, so that's all good. Let's talk fuel system. So I was going to do a single -8 feed from the rear up to the engine, split it off into two -6s, one into each fuel rail, but then that complicates things because then you've got to return off each fuel rail into the reg. It's two returns. It's kind of like, it gets messy and unnecessary. Maybe if it was making 1,000 horsepower at the tyres, you'd go that way. But for our setup, I think we go a single -8 feed to this fuel rail, and then we'll go -8 or -6 across. Maybe we'll go -8 joining the two rails together, and then a -6 feed off the return into the reg, and then outside the reg and return to the back of the car. And then we've also got to do a flex fuel sensor, but that will simplify things greatly if we do it that way. There's no point in complicating this situation any more than it needs to be. So we do have a little issue here in this temp sensor here is interfering with these fittings. So I think we delete that. I don't think we need it because we have a temp sensor, like a proper sensor there. That's just like a gauge sensor there. We don't need the gauge sensor. Let's delete that. Let's make a joiner up for those and then start looking at our placement of our regulator, wherever we're going to put that. All right, you off. So these fuel rails from BPP, they came with -6 fittings. So -8 ORB, -6 at this end. And I'm sure it's fine, but what we'll do is we'll go, like I said, -8 feed, -8, and it'll be -8 all the way past the injectors to the return line. So that way we're going to have maximum amount of fuel available for our injectors. We just need to join our two fuel rails together here at the front of the intake. Wow. Nope. So I cut it longer than it needs to be. There'll be a little bit of wastage, but I figure let's do that just so it's easier to work with. I've got to say, this Teflon stuff is remarkably easy to work with. Got to be happy with that. All right, let's do that one up. Let's go see if it fits. Sweet. So we're using this Proflow fuel pressure regulator. Obviously you mount it after the fuel rail, so this goes in the return line, sets the fuel pressure in the entire system. We're not going to run a gauge on the regulator. This isn't the 80s anymore. We're going to use a fuel pressure sensor. So from Haltech, so we'll have to screw that into there and just make sure that we've got enough clearance wherever we mount this, that we have enough clearance for our sensor as well. All right, let's go find a home for it. Right, so I think I've found a home for our regulator. We're going to have to use like a double female swivel to join them, but that won't be good enough to support the reg, so we'll have to make a bracket to support the reg. We do have a couple of threaded holes in this sort of water channel here that aren't used, so we can make a bracket off them. So we need to get that double swivel fitting first, so that way we can know how far across we are, and then we make our bracket. But I think that's going to be our home for the regulator. Yeah. So we've got the basics laid out. We know where all our lines are going to run to. We know where we're going to put our fuel pressure reg, and we also know where we're going to put our flex fuel sensor, but we have to make some brackets up for that stuff, and to make the brackets we need the fittings. So we're waiting on the fittings. They'll be here in the next day or two. So I figure while we're waiting for that to happen, let's go back to the back of the car and pull the surge tank out and get the pumps in the surge tank, because our submersible E85 hose has shown up. So let's do that. Okay, so I guess we don't need that for the moment. Right, where's our pumps? Because we're only putting 2 pumps in our carrier, we have to take out one of our little feed nipples here, and we'll block that off with an ORB fitting, just a blocking plug, because otherwise we'll be feeding it with 2 pumps and it'll be just pissing out the third. So obviously, you know, they all feed into a common chamber and then come out this -8 here on the top. So we'll have to get a block off plug for that. And of course, Scotty's an idiot because he got the wrong size hose. Here's our E85 submersible hose. 3/8, which is what I thought it was based off the fittings here, but it's actually 5/16. So, I'll put in another order for hose. Bugger. All right, well, I guess we're doing this another day. And I guess you'll see all that on a future episode of Carnage.